Ben, you know, the business has changed so much, and one of the things that I think has changed for artists, and you and I were just talking about this, is the deal structure. And I was curious, can you talk about sort of the history of the 360 deal where all income sources are encompassed? That wasn't something that was taken strictly just by a major company. You were saying that all companies, independent companies in the past have done that. Can you talk about that?
I wouldn't say all, but if you go back to even the 50s, if you read the history of the music business, a lot of those independent labels would be the record company, they'd be the booking agency, they'd be the music publisher, they'd be the manager, all of these things, because nobody else was doing it and the business was sort of forming in those days. A lot of the New York labels, the Roulette Records type situations, the Morris Levy types, that's just the way it was. And then but even Aerosmith, you know, when they first signed their deal, they signed to a production company, and it was a 360 deal, publishing, recording, and management. And that's why they complained about it later when they became famous. They're like, why are we giving all this money away? But that was common business practice in those days. But usually it was the smaller labels or the production companies that were developing the artists, and then they take them to a major label.
Right.
And that was. And the major labels in those days, because they sold so many records, which were vinyl albums or singles in those days, it just wasn't an issue about having to worry about participating in touring or merchandising, t-shirts. They didn't even think about it because they sold so many records. The shows and the t-shirts were like a secondary income stream that was way down here. Now it's totally flipped, where the CD or the download is the calling card or the promotional item just to get people to go to a show and buy a t-shirt. So that's really where the money is. So the labels obviously at some point said, well, if we're going to put this much money into branding an artist and making them valuable in the marketplace, we have to participate.
Can you talk about what the deal structures are in a 360 deal when you make those deals with labels or companies? What kind of percentages are they taking in the other arenas? Because that's very seldom spoken of. What are we talking about?
The simplest one is a 50-50
Really?
across the board, and I think a lot of times it has to do with how young the band is, if they have any kind of leverage, and how much money the label is going to sink in. If it's millions, it's like, hey, we want 50% of everything. That's certainly the way it is if you're on American Idol or something. Those deals are 50-50 across the board. Merchandising, touring, recordings, music publishing, everything. But I found that if it's more of a band that's sort of developed themselves, have a following, a fan base, the label's still going to want to participate in all those income streams, but it's at different levels. It's like records might be 50%, but touring might be 20%, and publishing might be 30%, and merchandise might be 25%, and these things can go up or down, and you know, based on time and based on sales plateaus and performances and things. You know, those things are negotiable, and obviously you can get different advances tied to each income stream sometimes too, not just one advance. It's like, oh, okay, well, we'll give you $50,000 for publishing and $75,000 for merchandise. You know what I mean? It's if you're smart about those things, you can ask, and depending on who you're dealing with, if it's Sony, maybe you'll get it.
Ben, can you talk about some of the realities today that you're encountering with labels as far as artist signings? Are there as many of them? You know, what kinds of deals you're encountering day to day in your business for acts and for bands, as far as that goes?
A lot less direct signing, at least for me, and we're not a gigantic firm. Maybe some of the really big firms might attract more of the bands that are in a better position to get a deal. We're a small firm, so we tend to work with a lot of developing and indie acts. So I'm finding there's a lot more like production type development deals. There's a lot of producers out there and managers I found that really want to work with new artists, and the labels I think are taking a back seat or a wait and see approach a little more until the acts kind of gotten to the level where it makes sense for them to invest in something as opposed to developing it from the ground up. So I'm doing a lot more management agreements and production type agreements, in the sense that it's usually a producer that's helping maybe make the demos or make a full-length album for an artist and help them get a direction and an image. And then I think they hopefully wish that maybe a bigger distributor will get involved marketing it at some point, because that's very expensive, as you know. That's always the missing link, is the marketing and the promotion, which can be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And it's
not
also a
more.
huge investment of time, it seems. You know,
Yeah.
even if it's not a lot of money, it seems like it's an enormous amount of time. So, are you seeing producers that are, doing these kinds of agreements with artists that are coming your way in terms of they're going to be making the full album with them? They're going to be taking on that responsibility to make the album?
I think so. A lot of them have a studio, so it's
Right.
really not. It is just more of a time investment than anything, and it's always a crapshoot, of course, whether an artist is ever going to amount to anything. But and I think because of the internet, people are finding out about great artists. Of course, there's a lot of noise and mid-level and amateur people, but now you can find somebody from the Philippines or Japan or Germany or Sweden that's amazing that maybe you didn't have access to before because you only knew it was in your own backyard. So
Yeah, Journey found their new
Yes.
lead singer off of a YouTube video who was in a Journey tribute band, but they saw the YouTube video and they said this guy was so amazing. They got him to come, and he is now the lead singer for Journey.
for a couple of years at least.
yeah.
Yes, and yes, John Anderson had to leave the group because
Right.
they did the same thing. They found a tribute guy who sings like John Anderson, and he's in Yes now to take his place. So.
And that's a very lucrative, touring gig.
Yeah, I think the other guys in the band are like, we want to make money and we can't. Our singer's gone, but we'll just find somebody else. I mean, I know it's a tough call, but maybe the audiences don't relate so much to each individual, but just the unit. It's Yes, it's Journey. I don't know if they think, oh, Steve Perry's not there, we're not going to go. Maybe it's just they love Journey.
Right. And they love that material and that history and that brand.
So as long as you sound close enough, I think people don't mind.
Yeah, interesting.
But I think from a band's perspective, maybe it might be hard sometimes to bridge that gap and leave behind somebody that was so important to your career, your history.
What are you seeing from the label's point of view? Are there new kinds of deals being offered from the labels? Have any of the essential structures changed? Or are they still looking for that 7-album, 7-year kind of situation? Or has that changed over the years?
Yeah, they're still signing an artist for it's an album with options for more at their option. But what I'm seeing is instead of doing an album, they'll test market more with singles. They want to put out 2, 3 singles. They might have recorded a full album, but they don't want to market it yet till they know there's some traction in the marketplace, that there's a demand for the album. So I think there's a lot more singles type situation or singles deals with options to make albums, just because the labels don't want to go overboard on the spending until they have to. They're very budget conscious. I've noticed that. But that's okay, because you could sell millions of singles and might do just as well. And I see the trend maybe being at some point where there aren't albums anymore. It's just singles. Every month release a single or package 3 singles together, a bundle, and that's what it is, because most of the newer generation, they're just listening on their mobiles or their computers anyway. I don't know if they really care about having 10 songs at a time.
Final question, Ben. Do you see a shift or a change in your experience with labels in terms of signing fewer and fewer or more narrow genre? Like, is there a specific style of music being signed more today than ever before?
Well, it's trendy, as you know, but currently it's not rock. It's more dance pop, up-tempo type music. From either Katy Perry and the Lady Gagas to this, this dance, the Skrillex, the M83. There's all these DJs, the David Guetta type. I mean, this is really popular. I mean, if you watch the Grammys, that was half of it this year. But I think that's trendy, because we work with a lot of rock bands, and right now it's a struggle to get a record company to sign a rock band.
Yeah, so
Just
many of
because
them-
I think it's harder to get added to the radio formats have sort of dissipated. So, but things go through cycles. So, luckily as lawyers, we mostly do paperwork, so it doesn't really matter so much. But I think I gravitate a little more towards rock and pop than I would like urban, for instance, and that's always big. Urban's always big.
Interesting. Okay. So there's a lot of, it's much more pop oriented. So it's much more just like the way the music charts are today.
Yeah, I think so. If you look at the top 10 is going to show you what's happening. But now, if you look in Billboard magazine, you have a lot of social media and big champagne type charts, which are a lot of times comprised of people you've never even heard of, because there are these people under the radar that are getting a lot of internet activity. but they're not signed yet. But they could be in the top 30 of a Billboard chart. It's pretty amazing. Because these things didn't exist a couple of years ago.
No, and we were just talking about that before you got here, the metrics. Ben, I want to thank you so much for coming and doing this. I appreciate it
Yeah,
immensely.
thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.